At 40, Lucas found himself sleeping under bridges and behind old warehouses on the outskirts of Cincinnati, Ohio. Life had once been good. He had a stable job as a mechanic, a modest home, and a little girl who called him daddy. But after losing custody during a bitter divorce and a workplace injury that left him unable to work, Lucas spiraled into homelessness. Each day was a struggle. He wandered the streets, relying on soup kitchens and warm-hearted strangers for food. Nights were the worst, cold, lonely, and filled with the echoes of what once was. Yet, even in his hardship, Lucas never lost his sense of compassion. He often gave away his last piece of bread to someone hungrier or helped others find shelter during stormy nights. The city didn't notice him. People passed by without looking. But Lucas never complained. He kept to himself, quietly surviving the harsh rhythm of the streets. His heart still beating with a hope that maybe, just maybe, life could offer something more. He never expected that his life would change, not because someone saved him, but because he decided to save something small, helpless, and shivering in the rain. It was a stormy afternoon in mid-October. The wind howled like a wounded animal, and the cold rain poured down in relentless sheets. Lucas had just found a dry spot beneath an overpass when he heard it, a faint, panicked yelp coming from somewhere nearby. At first, he thought it was just the wind. But then it came again, sharper, more desperate. He stood, straining his ears, and followed the sound across a muddy alley, where water rushed violently into a drainage pipe. As he got closer, he saw a tiny, shivering ball of fur wedged inside the narrow entrance of a storm drain, its paw trapped and body soaked to the bone. The puppy was no more than a few months old, its eyes filled with terror, its ribs visible beneath matted fur. Lucas didn't think twice. Dropping to his knees in the freezing water, he tried to pull the pup out, but the opening was too tight. Rainwater was rising fast, threatening to drown the little creature. His fingers turned numb as he struggled, scraping his arms against jagged metal. His breath came in ragged gasps, but he refused to give up. "Hang on, buddy, just hang on," he whispered, using an old metal rod nearby. Lucas pried open the edge of the pipe just enough to reach the pup's paw. With one final tug, the dog slipped free, yelping and collapsing into Lucas's arms. He held the trembling animal against his chest, soaking wet and freezing, but safe. Lucas wrapped it in his threadbare coat and whispered gently, "You're okay now, you're safe." That night, huddled under a cardboard shelter with the puppy beside him, something shifted in Lucas. For the first time in months, he felt a purpose again. He named the pup Buddy, and even though he barely had enough to survive himself, he always made sure Buddy ate first. In the days that followed, Buddy never left his side. Strangers who once ignored Lucas began stopping to pet the puppy, offering bits of food or warm blankets. The tiny dog had unknowingly become a bridge between Lucas and a world that had long forgotten him. Still, Lucas never once imagined that rescuing a stray dog from a sewer would become the spark that would change everything. Because somewhere, someone was searching for that little dog, and that someone was about to walk into Lucas's life, with a gift far greater than he could ever imagine. Three months had passed since Lucas pulled Buddy from that drain, and the bond between man and dog had only grown stronger. Every day, they wandered the streets together, Lucas talking softly to him, and Buddy responding with loyal eyes and a constantly wagging tail. The streets still weren't kind, but somehow, with Buddy beside him, the nights didn't feel as cold. The hunger didn't bite as sharply. One sunny morning, as Lucas sat outside a downtown bakery, hoping for a warm coffee or a half-eaten roll, Buddy barked unexpectedly. His ears perked up, his body alert. Lucas turned just as a sleek black car pulled up along the curb. Out stepped a sharply dressed older man in a navy wool coat, his silver hair combed back, and his eyes scanning the sidewalk anxiously. The man knelt the moment he saw Buddy. "Bailey," he whispered, voice cracking with emotion. Buddy froze. Then, to Lucas's surprise, the little dog let out a high-pitched whine and bolted toward the man, tail wagging wildly. The stranger dropped to his knees on the sidewalk, tears filling his eyes as Buddy, no, Bailey, climbed into his arms, licking his face with uncontainable joy. Lucas stood silently, confused and unsure of what was happening. The man looked up, cradling the dog against his chest. "I thought I'd lost him forever," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He slipped out of my backyard during a thunderstorm months ago. I searched everywhere, posted flyers, hired people, nothing. I had almost given up, until someone told me about a homeless man in this area who always had a little white dog with him." Lucas's heart skipped. I'm just glad he's okay," Lucas said quietly, trying not to let the ache show in his voice. "He's been my only companion for a while now." The man rose to his feet, still holding Buddy, Bailey. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. "This is for you, $50,000. It's the least I can do for someone who saved his life, and gave him love when I couldn't." Lucas looked at the envelope, then back at Buddy, who now sat quietly at the man's feet, still glancing back at Lucas, almost confused. But Lucas shook his head slowly. "I can't take that," he said, voice steady. "I didn't do it for money. I just couldn't let him die in that drain." The man blinked, stunned. "Are you sure? This could change your life." Lucas hesitated, then said, "There is something you could do instead." The man tilted his head. "There's a children's shelter on 9th Street. I grew up there. They're struggling, always short on food. Heat in the winter, books. If you really want to make a difference, help them." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then the man's expression softened into something deeper than gratitude, respect. He extended his hand. "My name is Richard Caldwell. I own Caldwell Industries. I don't meet many men who would do what you just did. I'll help that shelter. And if you're willing, I'd like to offer you a job." Lucas's eyes widened. "A job?" Richard smiled. "At one of our animal rescue centers. You clearly have a gift." Lucas looked down at his calloused hands, then back up at the man who held his best friend. He never imagined that saving a dog would lead to this. But then again, the world has a strange way of rewarding quiet kindness. That night, Lucas didn't sleep under a bridge. For the first time in nearly 2 years, he had a warm bed, a hot shower, and clean clothes, offered to him by Richard, the man whose life had unknowingly intersected with his through a desperate dog and a storm drain. Lucas sat on the edge of a modest guest-room bed in Richard's estate, a fresh towel draped over his shoulders, still not fully processing how everything had shifted so fast. Just days ago, he was digging through trash bins to find scraps for Buddy. Now, he was being offered a job, a second chance, and something even greater, a renewed sense of worth. But it wasn't the soft mattress or the food that stirred his soul. It was the realization that someone had seen him. For years, he had been invisible, lost in the background of a bustling city. Passed by, judged, discarded, yet, his one selfless act had cut through the fog of indifference. He walked to the window and looked out into the quiet night. The stars shimmered faintly above the city skyline. A place that once felt like a cold cage now glowed with quiet possibility. The next morning, Richard drove him to the children's shelter on 9th Street. Lucas hadn't returned there since he was 16. The memories came rushing back, the peeling paint, the squeaky doors, the laughter of kids trying to forget the weight of the world. He watched as Richard handed the director a check worth more than Lucas had ever seen in his life. Enough to repair the building, fund meals for a year, even bring in tutors and therapists. As children ran out to see what was happening, one little girl, no older than 6, wrapped her arms around Lucas's leg. "Are you the man who helped the puppy?" she asked. He knelt down. "I guess I am. You're a hero," she whispered, hugging him tighter. Tears welled in Lucas's eyes. For years, he had believed he was nothing more than a broken man, a failure. But now, through the eyes of a child, and the kindness of a stranger, he began to see himself differently. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was needed. He mattered. Later that week, Lucas started work at the animal rescue center Richard helped fund in Lucas's name, Buddy's Hope. The name made him laugh every time he saw the sign. He fed, bathed, and walked dogs. He even began speaking at schools and shelters, sharing his story, not for sympathy, but to remind people that small acts of compassion can echo louder than we know. And every evening, after a long day, Buddy, now back in Lucas's care thanks to Richard, would run into his arms. Tail wagging like always, Lucas was no longer a man surviving the world. He was a man changing it. Lucas had always believed his story would end quietly, unnoticed, on some forgotten street corner. But now, every day felt like a new beginning. His work at Buddy's Hope, the rescue center named after the pup that changed his life, had become more than just a job. It was a mission. Every abandoned animal he cared for reminded him of his own journey, lost, scared, misunderstood, but still deserving of love and a second chance. Word of Lucas's transformation spread. Local news ran a segment on the homeless hero who saved a millionaire's dog and chose to help others instead of taking the money. The story touched hearts. Donations began pouring in, and Buddy's Hope expanded into a full-fledged rehabilitation and adoption center. Lucas was offered a full-time position, not just as a caretaker, but as a community outreach coordinator. His job? Visit schools, speak at events, and share how small acts of kindness could ripple out into massive change. At first, the idea terrified him. Public speaking? Him? But he remembered that little girl at the shelter, calling him a hero. He remembered how invisible he had once felt. And so he stood before crowds, voice shaking at first, but growing stronger with each word. People listened. Teenagers who thought their lives were over saw in Lucas a new path. Adults stuck in cycles of regret found hope in his journey. And animals, so many animals, found homes because of his voice. One afternoon, after a school event, an older gentleman approached him. "I used to ignore folks like you," he said, eyes downcast. "But your story, it opened my eyes. I'm volunteering at the shelter now. I just thought you should know." Lucas nodded, heart full. He often returned to the same bench near the alley where he had first found Buddy. Not to relive the past, but to remember how far he had come. Sometimes, he'd find other homeless men and women there, offering them food, listening to their stories. He never forgot where he came from, and he never judged. Richard Caldwell, now both mentor and friend, remained in touch. "You could work in my company anytime," he once told Lucas. But Lucas simply smiled. "This is where I'm meant to be." And he was. Because what started as a rescue, one small dog in a flooded storm drain, had turned into something far greater. It became a story of healing, of giving, and of rebirth. Lucas had been given an opportunity. Yes, but more importantly, he had become an opportunity. For the animals he saved. For the kids who looked up to him. For the people who had given up on life until they heard his voice. Opportunity, he learned, doesn't always knock. Sometimes, it whimpers in a drainpipe. And sometimes, the ones who answer are the most unlikely heroes. Months turned into a year, and Lucas had become a different man. Not because he now had a steady job, a clean home, or a small group of friends who called him by name. Those things were miracles in themselves, but the true change happened deep inside. For the first time in his life, Lucas believed he was worthy of happiness, of purpose, of love. The mirror no longer reflected a tired, broken man. It reflected someone resilient, someone whole. Buddy remained faithfully by his side, often curled up near Lucas's feet while he worked on paperwork or prepared for speaking engagements. The bond between them hadn't just survived, it had grown. People often joked that Buddy was Lucas's shadow, but Lucas would always respond with a smile. "Nah, he's my light." As Buddy's Hope expanded, Lucas started a program called Second Leash, aimed at pairing shelter dogs with veterans and homeless individuals in transitional housing. The idea was simple: give both human and dog a second chance at life. The results were nothing short of incredible. Depression lifted, purpose returned, and people began to rebuild. Just like Lucas had. He also created monthly community dinners at the rescue center, inviting the unhoused, the lonely, the forgotten. It wasn't just about food, it was about dignity. He greeted each person with warmth, knowing firsthand how it felt to be overlooked. He listened more than he spoke, offered hugs where words failed, and reminded people, "You matter. You always have." One afternoon, a teenage boy named Tyrell showed up at Buddy's Hope after hearing Lucas speak at his school. He had been kicked out of his home and was living in a shelter. Lucas took him under his wing, teaching him how to care for the dogs, how to clean their spaces, how to read their body language. Tyrell thrived. He wasn't just learning about animals, he was learning about himself. And Lucas saw in Tyrell a younger version of who he used to be, lost, scared, but filled with untapped potential. When Tyrell received his first paycheck working part-time at the center, he burst into tears. "I've never felt like I was good at anything," he said. Lucas put a hand on his shoulder. "You're not just good, you're great. And now it's your turn to show the next kid that they are too." Through it all, Lucas remained humble. He never sought recognition or praise. In fact, he often redirected the spotlight to others. "I'm not special," he'd say. "I just listened to a cry for help and answered." Anyone can do that. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was special, not because of the fame, or the donations, or even the rescue center, but because he had chosen to keep his heart open. Even when the world had tried to shut it down, Lucas had grown, not into someone new, but into the person he was always meant to be. The day of the grand reopening of Buddy's Hope was nothing short of magical. A year ago, the building was an abandoned shell. Now, it stood proud, bright walls adorned with paw prints, smiling volunteers welcoming visitors, and dogs wagging their tails behind freshly painted fences. But more than the structure, it was the spirit inside that had changed. Lucas stood near the entrance, wearing a simple button-up shirt and clean jeans, his only suit replaced by comfort and humility. A local reporter approached him with a mic, asking, "How does it feel, knowing all this exists because of you?" He looked around at the families adopting animals, kids laughing, elderly folks petting sleepy hounds, and said quietly, "I didn't build this alone. This started with one small choice, to stop and help something that couldn't help itself. Everything since then, that's just been love echoing outward." Applause erupted as Richard Caldwell, now a close friend and co-founder, stepped onto the podium. He raised a plaque engraved with Lucas's name. "This man taught me more about kindness than any boardroom ever could," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. "He reminded me that wealth means nothing if it doesn't lift others up." Lucas tried to step back modestly, but Richard pulled him forward. "We named this building not just after a dog, but after what it represents, Buddy's Hope, a second chance for all." Tears welled in Lucas's eyes. It wasn't just about dogs anymore. It was about second chances, for animals, for people, for broken spirits. Later that evening, as the crowds dispersed and volunteers cleaned up, Lucas sat alone on the front steps. The air was warm, the sky streaked in gold and purple. Buddy jumped into his lap, curling up like he had done that first night after the rescue. Lucas rubbed behind his ears and whispered, "You started all this, didn't you, boy?" The dog gave a soft huff and nestled deeper into his arms. For a long time, Lucas had believed that his life would be defined by the lowest moments, his losses, his failures, his homelessness. But now, he understood something different. Your story isn't over when you fall. It begins when you rise. And sometimes, rising starts with simply reaching out your hand, or bending down to lift someone, or something, smaller than you. Lucas didn't have millions. He didn't need them. He had a mission, a community, and a faithful friend. But most of all, he had his humanity back. And that was more than enough. So, when someone asked him weeks later, "What's your secret?" Lucas only smiled and said, "I stopped waiting for someone to save me, and started saving what I could." Life doesn't always give second chances, but kindness does. Lucas's journey reminds us that we don't need wealth, power, or recognition to change the world. Sometimes, all it takes is the courage to act when no one is watching. A single moment of compassion, pulling a frightened dog from a flooded drain, unleashed a chain of events that transformed not only his life but the lives of countless others. We live in a world where people walk past the hurting, the homeless, and the voiceless without a second glance. But what if, like Lucas, we chose to pause, to notice, to care? You never know what might come from one small act of good. Not every gesture will be repaid with a check or fame, but every genuine act of kindness leaves a mark. And sometimes, the person you save ends up saving you right back.